Hello, I'm Brenda Happel, and I'd like to introduce you to my book, Sickness in Health, Bullying in Nursing and Other Health Professions. I decided to write this book after I retired. I actually retired much earlier than I would have anticipated, and that was largely a result of the bullying, harassment, and toxicity I had been experiencing for many years. The last 28 or so years of my career were in academia. I worked for various universities and I experienced what considered the time to be bad behaviour. I was a bit unlucky with some of the people I worked with. But I started to realise after a while that there was perhaps more to it than that. It was actually bullying. And when I realised that I was being bullied, I decided I'd had enough. And for the sake of my relationship and my physical and mental health, that it was time to leave. And when I did retire, I felt a lot of mixed emotions. Firstly, I felt very relieved that was all over, that part of my life was behind me. I felt sadness because I really loved the work I did and I put so much of myself into it. And now it was left behind. And I also felt a great deal of disappointment that I couldn't have achieved more in my career. As an academic, I had a very successful career by all the metrics that are generally used to measure success. Nevertheless, I felt that if many of my colleagues, or so-called colleagues, had worked with me instead of against me, that as an individual and as part of a group, we could have achieved so much more for our profession. And when I also felt the need to do something about this, it wasn't something I could just walk away from and say, well, that's over. I'm on to the next stage of my life. I needed to do something, perhaps to give me some sense of closure. So I decided as an academic to write a book. I wanted this book to be about people's lives. I didn't want it to be a research project. It was much, much more personal than that. So I really wanted to have conversations with people and tell their story as best I could. So I went onto social media and I eventually found 12 health professionals that were willing to share their story with me. And they come from a variety of health professions. So we had conversations, but I had between 2 and 4 conversations with each of these people who I called champions, so that they're not research participants, they're human beings conveying their story to me. And as following all of those, I had I had collected a lot of information, and I went through it and sort of put things into chapters. And we started off first of all talking about why they had become health professionals to get more of a picture of them as people, and then about the type of bullying they experienced. Most experienced it from managers. There was quite a few that experienced it from peers and colleagues, and rarely there were some that had experienced it for people who worked for them, which is known as upward bullying. And most of their bullying had been at the hands of health professionals. And when I reflected back on my own, another reason, I guess, for writing this book was I've reflected back on my own experiences, and I was horrified by some of the things that happened to me, but I was also fascinated, thinking, how could you as a health professional think that this is an okay way to treat somebody? Does your duty of care or your sense of compassion leave when you leave the clinical area and you don't use that at all in terms of how you interact with your colleagues or people who work for you? So anyway, then we looked at the kind of the tactics that bullies had used, and there were the obvious ones, though they were much less common, and that was people that would yell and scream, and in one case even assault one of the champions. But more often they were more often they were subtle. And that included the two-headed snake, which is, the person who you think is a great colleague and you have a great relationship with, but behind your back, they are undermining you. They're spreading rumours about you. And the intention is to get people to turn against you. So that was that one. And the more particularly subtle ones were the more undermining, putting roadblocks in the way, not giving people information that they needed to do their job properly. So that instead of actually getting on and doing the job that you loved and that you wanted to do well, you were trying to work through the system, trying to get all these roadblocks out of the way. There were examples of people being humiliated, being excluded from activities that other people were involved in, and that you would expect to be involved in if it wasn't for the fact that you're a target of bullying. So, and then we looked at obviously the impact this had on the champions, and it was profound. All of them described how they loved the work they did, really enjoyed it, and really that's what they wanted to do with their lives. But they were thwarted by all of this bullying that they experienced. And then we in some cases there was one of the champions had attempted suicide, and one had long-term suicidal thoughts. Others were drinking too much, not sleeping was really common, and they often lost the ability to enjoy the things that they would normally enjoy. So a lot of time was just spent, lacking energy and ruminating and absolutely dreading going back to work. They responded to this in a number of different ways. HR was very common. People went to HR with the belief that they would help them out, and in actual fact found that they didn't at all, and that often the opposite happened. They actually found that they were in greater trouble than they had been previously. Some tried unions, and most didn't have very much success. They felt that the unions were not willing or not able to make much difference. And legal action was considered, but was very costly. And some people took things further through other mechanisms. But generally, attempts to resolve it were not successful. Some tried to talk to their managers or the people bullying them, and got nowhere, and again often got more the same. And so another thing that we talked about was why people felt that they were being bullied, and there's often a misconception that people who are bullied are weak. In this case, the people that were bullied, and the literature supports this, tended to be the more successful, the more respected, the hardworking. All of the things that you think would protect you against bullying actually made people much more likely to be subjected to it. And then we just talked generally about why this was happening. Why did this still continue? People know about it. There's literature around that says bullying is rife in the health professions. It's one of the highest rates of bullying. And pretty much everyone agreed that the culture of health is absolutely toxic. That certainly once it comes to staff, that people bullying is at best condoned and at worst encouraged. And so within that environment, it's very, very difficult to actually address bullying. You need to have awareness and a genuine desire on behalf of management at all levels, and not to tolerate bullying. And if that was to happen, then it probably wouldn't stop, but it would certainly reduce significantly. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk about this was because the subtle bullying, because it's very hard. First of all, it's hard to necessarily realise that that is actually a form of bullying. And secondly, that because it's subtle, it's very hard to prove. So if you go to HR and say, my boss isn't giving me the information I need to do my job, then if HR were to actually take that seriously and talk to your boss, the boss would probably just see it as an oversight. And then it's often also turned around that you're too oversensitive. In my case, I was often told that I was really lucky to have what I had, the resources I had, even though they'd been agreed to before I accepted the job. And it was sort of putting it back on me. There was nothing wrong with my boss. There was something wrong with me. So I really wanted to highlight that. I know from many of the people that I have talked to about this book that have read the book, really have said, I realise now that I've been bullied, or I realise now that I have witnessed a lot of bullying and didn't realise that that's what was happening. So it really is largely about gaining awareness so that we can have some real and meaningful conversations about bullying and how to stop it. So for more information, you can see from the link there at hapelconsulting.com.au, Sickness in Health, gives you more information about the book and how to purchase a copy if you wish to do so. So thanks very much for listening. And one thing I'd just like to end with is saying, please be aware of your actions. Be aware of the impact that your actions have on colleagues. And if you witness bullying, at the very least, support the person who's experiencing that bullying. Thank you very much.